What's going on, everybody? And welcome into the 118th episode of the CRZY podcast. As always, I'm your host, Stephen Gates, and this is the show where we talk about creativity, leadership, design, and everything else that helps to empower creative people. Now, remember, you can listen to all the shows, get the show notes, and a whole lot more. Just head over to thecrazy1.com. It's the words the crazy and the number 1.com. It's been a little bit since I've asked for it, so hey, if you like the show, if you're getting good stuff out of it, do me a favor, go to your favorite podcast platform, leave a review. It helps more people find the content, has the show have a bigger impact, lets me know that people are actually listening, and I just really appreciate it. And also, hey, while you're there, just go ahead and hit the subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform so you get the latest episodes whenever those come out. Also, hey, remember, the CRZY is also over on YouTube with videos that I've done on career coaching, all sorts of different tutorials, masterclasses. You can see some of my past keynotes. Same thing, just head over to thecrazy1.com/YouTube, and you can subscribe to that content too. And always, it's a standing offer. If you've got any questions or just want to keep up with my adventures, you can always follow me personally on Twitter or Instagram, and you can follow the show on LinkedIn or Facebook. Well, enough of the obligatory upfront marketing PR stuff. Look, I want to do something a little bit different with this show today. Because look, I know over the last few shows, we've been talking about some subjects that maybe weren't the lightest, easiest things to talk about. We've been talking about imposter syndrome. We've been talking about how to deal with different cultures. So I wanted to lighten things up a little bit today. Now, look, we all know that for the past 18 months, the whole world has been trying to get used to remote work. As someone who's been working fully remote for over 4 years, it's been an interesting swing to watch, as it felt like, I sort of went from being this oddity or this sideshow that the world viewed as, just, I don't know what, some sort of like carnival sideshow or something, to then within weeks, everybody wanting to learn more about it, learn how to do it, do all those sort of things. And I think that's the funny part, was back in 2018, all the way back in episode 64, I talked about the benefits of remote work. And that episode makes me laugh, because I think that was one of the least listened to episodes that I'd had on the entire show. Nobody paid attention to it. Nobody wanted to understand it. And then all of a sudden, in a couple weeks, it jumped up to like the top 5, because then it was something everybody wanted to know about. So here we are. We're all doing remote work. And I think remote it's brought a ton of benefits. I think it's brought an increased awareness of work-life balance, of what family actually means, of mental health, of a lot of really good things. And look, I think we talked about this just 2 episodes ago, back in episode 116. It's brought about a bunch of new challenges too. I think that whenever you take a step back and you really look at what are the top 3 things that people struggle with, and I think this is true of everybody I've talked to the world over, the 3 biggest ones are: 1, unplugging after work. We talked about that back in episode 64, about how whenever you aren't changing from going from your home to an office and back again, the boundaries between your personal life and your work life blur. I think loneliness. This was a big thing people have obviously struggled with if you just were transitioning into this for the first time. And the last one really is around collaboration or communication, that it just feels different or harder to be able to build that trust and to be able to do the team building activities and do those sort of things that you really want. And I think even now, right, like 18 months later, too many teams still haven't caught on to the fact that you have to overcome these issues to build teamwork, build trust, and really empower vulnerability, because it is a tough thing to do. So that's what I want to focus on today. Or what are some of the things that I've seen other teams do? What are some of the things that my teams have done? What are some of the things just through research that are really good ways to fight that work-life balance thing, but primarily to fight the loneliness, that collaboration and communication issues? Because look, we're going to have to build trust and build teamwork differently, especially because now you're starting to see, thanks to the Great Resignation, people leaving. And then new people are coming into the company, into the team. And this is the only way they've ever interacted with people. They don't have that legacy of maybe sitting next to somebody in the office. So the relationships are just going to be different. So in this episode, I want to look at why remote team building is critical to your success. And then I want to take you through some of, what I think are my favorite team building activities that I've done, or like I said, I've seen other people do over the last couple years. Let's start with, and look, I hope that it would be obvious why building trust and building teamwork is necessary. And I think at the end of the day, most people inherently know and understand that it is. But Like most big problems that people have with their company or their team, you can recognize the problem, you feel it, you're aware of it, you just don't know how to start, or what do you need to do differently? Look, we all knew that team building was important when we all worked in the same physical space. But in this transition to remote work, I think too many teams left behind some of the critical behaviors, some of the exercises, some of the things we knew when we all worked together whenever we went to remote, because just a few too many people, I think, thought that everything needed to change. And that at the end of the day, to do great work, to do creativity and all these things, trust and teamwork, it doesn't matter if you're in person or remote, that's not going to change. I think many of us also didn't really realize maybe how much of that team building and trust was done through those casual everyday interactions. Whether it was meetings, going to lunch, walking down the hall, or just sort of hanging out, you could just get to know people in a very different way. And I think that often is, as our interactions now have become so scheduled, that you will talk to this person from this time to this time, and that, I can look at my calendar. Hell, I can look at my week or my month and tell you exactly when am I going to interact with certain people, and that I probably will not interact with them outside of those designated windows. Well, that's the thing. That's the exact opposite of that sort of happenstance that we had when we were all together. Like we talked about all the way back in episode 64, we have to be more deliberate in doing some of the things and working in different ways that we used to take for granted. Because look, it's not a surprise that team building plays a big role in building a strong company culture. We were talking about this after we did an episode on culture. Because look, I think we inherently know it, we just struggle to maybe articulate it, that having a company culture in place, especially when you're remote, will help improve internal communication, external communication, trust, teamwork, mental health, psychological safety. A lot of these things really improve. But this is the thing, we just get too caught up in just doing the work, of getting through our meetings, of running the gauntlet, of, a lot of companies have that FOMO where we have more meetings than we used to because we have to be more deliberate about how we communicate. I want to walk you through, I think, some of the fun things, simple things that you can do. You could do these starting tomorrow to be able to do this, because I also think part of team building, part of leadership, some of it is really obvious to say we're going to sit down and we're going to invest in this and this is the goal of it. I think some of it is also just letting it be fun and not letting it feel like work or something that has to be quite so deliberate. So I tried to put a good mix of both of those in here so that you're going to be able to get a mix of a bunch of different things that you can do to try to be a little more deliberate, try to be a little bit more fun. But before we get into those activities, I think it's probably best to really kind of go over that there are actually different types of activities that should be used in different times at different ways. Because not everything is something you should do every week or every month. Some things you should only do once. Some things you should do all together in real time. Some you should do separately. I think it'll help you to understand those different dimensions by breaking each one of them down into these sort of 3 different areas. And now whenever I go through the activities, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you the type, which will be to tell you which one of these either or 3 dimensions is it, how long should it take, and what sort of tools do you need? Because generally I think those are the 3 things you're going to need to be able to figure it out. But all these activities are going to fall into sort of one or the other of 3 different things. Either they're going to be things that you do in real time, so I'll do it all together, or asynchronously, which means you can do it remotely through a Google Doc or a virtual whiteboard or something like that. Some of them are going to be practical, meaning that this is something that, just like the word says, is going to be practical, is going to build knowledge, build trust, be something that is very practical to your day-to-day. And some of them are going to be fun. And look, I think this is the thing, is we have to leave room for fun. I think too many of us think, like, since we're remote, we sort of forgot a little bit too much how to have fun, because so much of the structure of what we do is so planned out and so regimented that we've lost a bit of that spontaneity. And then finally, is this an activity you should do just once or maybe annually? Like, this is not something you would do the other option, which is to make it recurring. Make it something you do every week or every month. So each of the exercises is going to fall into one or the other of these sort of things, and we'll call that out. So let's start with a fun one. And so this one is one that, understandably, if you've ever watched MTV for any amount of time, we'll call CRZY. So this is one that you do in real time. You do it for fun, And I would make it recurring, because I think that as we go through and do this, if you just did everybody have this, do all of this all at once, it would probably get to be a little bit too much. And it's a nice sort of fun way to, I think in many cases, this only takes about 15 minutes. It's really good to, I think, often open meetings, and often either if they're big team meetings or things like that, so it can have the biggest impact. And all you need is your favorite video conferencing app. So that could be Zoom, it could be, Microsoft Teams, whatever it is you're using, that's really all you need. But the idea here is that, look, remote work is more personal than working in an office, because you do get to see a glimpse of people's houses, of their personal lives. You can see significant others, children, pets, mementos on the wall. What sort of tchotchkes do they have behind them? What sort of art do they like? This is a look that I think is something that you wouldn't normally get in the office, because when you're in the office, it lets you maybe be able to put on a bit more of a mask, or to separate yourself from that world a little bit more. So what CRZY does is it really looks to lean into that. And I think what you can do is, like I said, do this before or during a recurring weekly or monthly meeting. And all you're going to do is to ask one of the team members to be able to log into the meeting from their phone. So instead of doing it from your laptop and your webcam, do it from your phone. And then to be able to ask them to give a short tour, or honestly as much of their house or apartment as they're comfortable with. Because I think some people, maybe who get a little bit more OCD, like, don't stress them out and make them clean their whole house and make it looks like all of a sudden it has to be in some Architectural Digest shoot if they don't want to. Maybe it's just a tour of their office. Maybe it's a tour of the downstairs. It doesn't have to be the whole thing, just however much they're comfortable with. And when they're doing it, ask them to point out a few of their favorite things. And that could be some rare, impressive collectible they have, a fairly heirloom, just sort of anything that they love, anything that is something that they're going to want to share, something they're going to be proud of. And again, I think these tours can just take a few minutes, and they're just done by walking around your house, having the selfie view on in the video. But I think, look, the benefit here is that it does help everybody on the team get to know each other in a really different way, as it gives them these sort of insights and a bond as they honestly probably discover mutual interests that they didn't know about. Like I know this, and I've seen this for people that have been on my teams, where I didn't know that they loved building, science fiction models the way that I did, or I didn't know they liked, just to be able to cook as much as I did, or be able to do these sort of things. And then all of a sudden we had something totally different to be able to bond over than what we had before. And just that simple walk around to be able to take advantage of it breaks it up, makes it more fun. And so, like I said, pretend you're on MTV, pretend you're on CRZY, ask everybody to show your fridge or sort of whatever it is. But it's simple, it's fun. And this is one of those ones that doesn't feel like, team building, but it works really, really well. Now, the next one, I think this is one that's going to be a little bit more practical. So this is something that I think is a really good habit to get into. This is something I've done on past teams. It's something I do on my current team, which is what we'll call a guide to working with me. Now, this is something that's done asynchronously, so each team member does it on their own. That it's very practical because it will help you be able to work with people better and more efficiently. And usually it's something you only need to do once. But I will say that once you have done it, it forms a library, and we'll kind of talk about how that can become a recurring thing. But all in all, between you creating it and probably sharing it out, we're probably talking about an hour total of your time. And in this case, use some sort of a cloud document, again, a Google Docs or sort of whatever sort of document system you want, where it's just some place where it's easily shared. Because look, I think we have to recognize that in remote work, we do lose the ability to get to know people in ways that we used to. Like I said before, we don't bump into the hall or go to lunch or have an impromptu interaction that builds that teamwork and trust. So we have to be more deliberate in working with each other and how we build these bonds. I do think one of the best ways to do this is this getting to know me guide. And what this is it's just a simple document where you fill out a series of what I think are simple sounding questions, but can have complicated and deep answers if you want to be able to go there, to help everyone get to know you better, get a deeper understanding of how you like to work, and just sort of like, this is kind of the missing manual that maybe people wouldn't get otherwise. And I think it's important because it prioritizes the individual. It lets you have a voice. So I think this also helps with making sure that extroverts and introverts and all sorts of different communication styles are on equal footing. That it allows that style to be understood instead of everyone feeling like they have to act in this sort of extroverted way, or like there's some sort of invisible company standard, which every company has, no matter what they do, that this is what the quote-unquote ideal employee looks like. And what you can do is just make a blank template for this in Google Doc or, like I said, whatever sort of thing you want to be able to do. And I think it's at its best as either an exercise that everyone does all at once. So this means that take your immediate team, your leadership team, right? Like take whoever your peers are. You all would agree to do it at the same time. So everyone would fill it out individually. And then you would come back and spend, depending on the size of the team, probably half an hour, just going around and sort of reading through this, going through any highlights, seeing if people have any questions to be able to do that. Well, once you've done that, like I said, that then becomes a really nice archive. And so that it becomes a really great onboarding tool. So that as new members join the team, and as they start to have, or about, before they're about to have a one-on-one with somebody who they haven't met before, they can send their guide to working with them over to that person. So you start to immediately get a sense of who they are. Now, I think, look, you can customize the questions, and I've seen a couple different flavors of this. I'm sure if you Google it or search for it, I'm sure you'll find a bunch of different versions. The one that we use that I think has some good questions that work pretty well are, one, what's the best way to work with me? Am I collaborative? Am I extroverted, introverted? Just give me a few, like the 2 or 3 top line points of just how do you like to work? 2, I think it also is good if it is a little bit personal. Like 2, what do you like to do when you're not at work? If you're a leader, or again, if you're an IC or something like that, like as a leader, how do you like to work? What is it? What is your leadership style? I think also it's good to be able to go through and to have an area on what do people believe. So I think for all of us, we have an approach, we have a way of working, we have things that we think have to be true. And I think to be able to let people know what those things are is really helpful, because that way, if there's a communication style or a stylistic issue or an approach issue, I'm aware of what it is. Again, one that can be just for leaders are like, again, what do you expect from your team? So if somebody's going to come onto your team, you would say, hey, look, these are the things that really matter to me. This is the stuff that I expect. I think another one is, look, this can also be a really good tool for vulnerability. So another good question is one to say, hey, look, I'm human and I know I've got blind spots, and these are the things I'm working on. Can you please help me on it? Maybe it's communication. Maybe it's speaking up in meetings. Maybe it's speaking less in meetings. Maybe it could be any host of things. But I think that level of vulnerability, one, I think is really welcoming when you're coming onto a team. But 2, if you want to talk about building trust and teamwork, things like that go a really, really long way to make that happen. And then the last section, which would be sort of fun, is just put 3, 4, 5 photos in there with no explanation that should prompt conversation, and just say, hey, look, here are some photos you can ask me about whenever we meet. And I think just those couple things, usually this is a page to a page and a half long, depending on sort of how crazy you want to get with it. But it's a really good way to be able to let people understand who you are, be able to set the stage to working differently, to build that teamwork and trust that we need so much. Now, the next one, and I think some of these, like, look, the CRZY one, easy, everybody gets it. I think the guide to working with me, like, yeah, that's a good idea. We should be more deliberate about it. There are some of the ones in here that I purposely wanted to put in here because I think especially for the next 2, these are really looking at how do we take some of the ways that we used to work and be a little bit more deliberate in doing them in remote. Now, these may sound weird at first, but just roll with it and see what you think. So I think with this, one of the ones that I've seen some teams do successfully is to create a virtual break room. Because this is something that is real time, it's fun, it honestly is recurring in the fact that it probably is always live. It can take as long as you want, and again, all you need is a video conferencing app. But it really is starting to look at how do we deal with and create some of those kind of happenstance moments, but to do it with remote tools. And I think one of the best ones I've seen is this virtual break room, which is much like what you would have in an office. Think about it just like an open Zoom room that anyone can join at any time. And that's what it is you just will show up, much like you would at a break room at work. You're never sure who's going to be in there. You're never sure what's being talked about. And I think, look, to make these teams work and to get some momentum, and you need to make it into a ritual for the team. Because I think this is something where team leaders need to make sure that they encourage and they model the behavior of using these, so the rest of the team will as well. And I think that it really is a place where as it starts to catch on and people start to engage it, it really does feel like a community and becomes a part of the everyday normal working time, what you do. Now, I think some easy times to start encouraging people to do this would be things like meals. So drop by the break room for breakfast or drop by for lunch. Maybe do drinks. So that would you say, hey, look, drop by the break room this afternoon with your favorite cocktail at 5 o'clock, and we're going to have a happy hour. Or I've seen some teams that do a tea time or an afternoon break or any of these sort of things. But it really is just, it takes everybody being a little bit comfortable being uncomfortable. But it just creates those impromptu moments of really using these tools when it's not just for work. Because I think too often that's what we get caught up in is like, oh, when I'm on Slack or when I'm on Zoom, it has to be for work. And that's in many cases why I think you get Zoom fatigue or Slack fatigue or all these different fatigues is that's all you're doing is sort of using it that way. But just that ability to say, and look, and sometimes maybe you drop in and you're sitting there by yourself for 20 or 30 minutes until somebody else shows up. But I think just whenever you do that, and also when they show up, make sure you don't just start talking about work, about like, oh, I meant to ask you about this thing. Like, again, be deliberate in just being personal and enjoying the break. Now, the other one I think you can do around this, which is similar, but a little bit different, is to do live remote co-working. So this one is real time. It's a little more practical and it's recurring. How long it takes is up to you. And again, uses your, just a video app. But this is a variation on that remote. Let's try that again. This is a variation on the remote break room, which is remote live co-working. And this is another one of these shared virtual workspaces for everyone. But where the break room is more just to drop in, live remote co-working really looks more directly to recreate the office environment. So what would happen would be, maybe this is just for a time of day. Maybe it's just for a day. I know some teams that love this so much they do it all the time. But what you do would be to log in the morning and work just like you would any other way, but you just have your video on. What this is meant to do is to be able to basically recreate being in an office. That you would show up at some point in the morning, you would drop down in your desk, maybe you'd make small talk with other people, but you could sit there and work with other people around you. I think this feels weird at first because for so many of us, again, for Zoom, we're used to getting things done. But what this means is that all of a sudden you have your whole team and you can have those casual conversations while you're doing the work and they can feel motivated by seeing each other at work. Now, again, you can feel just the same way that you would. In most cases, what you need to do is just bring back the mentality you had at the office. Get up, go get a drink, go to the bathroom, make small talk with somebody else. You don't have to sit there and be like, oh my God, I have to look busy. Big brother is watching. Right? That's whenever this doesn't work well. But I do think if you're able to basically use it like trying to recreate that sort of space, and look, maybe use it like a war room, where it's all for a team who's working on a project. Maybe it's for a department where if all of design or something used to sit together, that same discipline where they work together. And again, this can be just for an hour or two. You can rotate through, is it just, a project team in the morning and the discipline team in the afternoon? Do you just do it one day a week? Do you do it on Fridays? Because look, it's going to be, I think, much like the break room, it's going to be a little bit awkward. It's going to be weird at first because everybody's going to be used to doing meetings over Zoom. And, again, they're going to want to think that we have to get something done. I have to look busy. If I'm looking off camera, what does that mean? What do people think about me? And so, look, think about doing things like maybe do an icebreaker or maybe make some deliberate small talk or do some of those things to make people comfortable with that. But again, just that ability to sort of recreate that office environment and just sort of co-work together, I think that can create some really interesting interactions for the team. And again, be able to just create some of the bonding casual things that maybe you wouldn't have before. Now, the next two, I think, are, again, going to go back to ones that are probably a little bit more, I think they can be both practical and fun. But they're going to be things that are, again, how do we not just use these tools to just do work, accomplish meetings, hit goals, do all that stuff? The first one, and this was something that my current team at WW did, which I really love, is a weekly AMA. And this is something that is asynchronous. It's fun. It's recurring because we do it every week. It probably only takes about 10 minutes. And again, use your favorite messaging app. And they do it every week. So on Monday, somebody in the team is going to post what's going to be just a brief overview of somebody that's on our team. And this is going to be similar, but a little bit different because where the guide to working with me is about how do I work with you, the AMA is really about, one, I think getting to know people, and then two, being able to ask them really whatever it is you want. And so every morning they post a brief about this person. And again, usually it's a few interesting photos What's their hometown, their current location, what's their favorite food, their favorite place they've traveled, a fun fact, and what do they do on the team. And so once that's posted, what you'll see happens is everybody just sort of goes through and scans through that, and then everybody dives in. And they can ask anything and everything they want of whoever that person is. And so that's the commitment, is if it's your week, you go in, you tag them, like in Slack, you put @ and what their name is, so they're sure that they know when they get asked a question. And I think the thing that we've found is that the funnier and sometimes the crazier the question, the more fun, the more useful, just the better the activity is. I'll give you a few examples of. So these were actual questions that were asked by the team last week of somebody who just joined the team. And these included, what's your favorite Halloween candy? If a song played every time you entered a room, what would that song be? If you could only eat one food again for the rest of your life, what is it? And what's one thing that your teacher said or did that you'll remember forever? So again, I think just all of these prompt, one, they're great questions. And I think I love it so much because people are really investing in this. They really want to get to know people. They're spending the time and the effort to do this. But again, it's just a fun, simple way that everybody can get in and do it. And it is amazing what you find out about people just through some of these simple questions. And week after week, I am blown away and so surprised and amazed at the questions that get asked and the answers that are a part of it, and doing all of those things, that it's just really awesome. I will, and you know what, I'll take a break for a quick second. I will always make a shameless plug that we are also hiring a lot of people on my team right now. So if this sounds like something you want to be a part of, go to LinkedIn, put in WW, or hit me up on a social media channel, and I'll send you sort of what all the openings are. We have a lot of openings on the team, but we have some absolutely amazing talent, and we are having just way too much fun right now doing all this. But shameless self-promotion over. The next one is going to be a little bit similar, but different to some of the things we talked about. And this is something called a learning circle. And this is something that's done in real time. I think it's both fun and practical. It's recurring, probably takes about 30 to 60 minutes, usually once a month. And what I would say for this is just, again, you need your favorite video conferencing app. And probably for this, since it's about learning, you might need some study materials, articles, videos, things like that. But I think really this looks at that in many cases, I think it's a little bit too easy to get lost and caught up in just doing the work. And you forget about building the team and expanding your skills. And I think, look, this has only gotten worse thanks to the fact that remote work can be so isolating. Now, learning circles is something that I'd learned about and picked up from Atlassian whenever I used to work for them in my last position. But one of the things I'll tell you is that if you are not aware of Atlassian's site called Atlassian Team Playbook, if you don't know what this is, I'm going to put a link to the show notes. It is a massive and truly incredible resource for team process, knowledge, exercises. There's all sorts of different plays that they have that you can run to be able to do different things and improve dynamics and all these sort of things. And so learning circles was something I'd heard about from members of their team and then saw it on their playbook. And it's something that you normally do with about 6 to 12 people. And what happens is you choose a topic you want to learn about. It could be leadership. It could be data fluency. It could be a new design program. It could be Figma. It could be any of these sort of things. But what happens is that each month you get together and talk about that subject. Now, obviously, if it's like leadership, that's going to be a different conversation than something very practical, like learning a particular aspect of Figma or FigJam or Mural or Miro or something like that, right? Those are going to be a little bit more practical. But what you want to be able to do is you get together, you talk about that subject. If it's about leadership, maybe you talk about a book you're reading, a good article, an interesting video, something that happened on your team. If it's, again, more practical, maybe you're going through a tutorial, a lesson, a new feature, something like that. But it's really getting together and being deliberate and saying, hey, look, we want to get better at this thing. And I think the best part of these learning circles is that it can extend beyond your immediate team. I think in many cases it may start with design or research or product or things like that. But look, I think what it's at its best is that it is really good at team building because it can extend beyond that. And you can get people from the entire organization to come together and want to be a part of this. Now, the next one goes back to being a fun one. And this is to have theme days. And theme days are things that are real time, they're fun, they're recurring. They honestly probably take very little time to be able to set up and do. And here again, they just require a video conferencing app and one particular app we want to talk about. Now, I have to be honest that this was something that I just put into the show yesterday because these theme days were something that a few members of my team and our product team started so that when I showed up to a meeting yesterday on Friday, it was really one of these things that was one of the most fun meetings I'd had in a really long time, and I thought it was so good I needed to add it in. But I think it points out something that's really important, is that when you start to invest in these sort of activities, whenever you start to invest in doing this stuff, it is something that becomes, I think that it catches on. So the team feels empowered to be able to invest in each other, to have fun, to work and think in these ways. This wasn't something that I said we should do. It's not anything I think anybody in leadership said they should do. They just started doing it. And it's great. And then we shared it with the whole team. And again, then it can go from there. But this is one of the more lighthearted team building activities that I really love. And this is where what happens is that every week the team picks a theme. And what that does then is that one day, I think for us going forward, it'll probably be on Friday. What you can do is that, so the theme for yesterday was Halloween. So what happened was, and I think I've seen some teams do this in the past where maybe it was like crazy shirt day or crazy tie day or you dress up or something like that. But they modernized it and they made it a little bit better and probably a little bit of an easier lift, because what they did was they showed up and had the Halloween theme through video filters. And so that meant that whenever I showed up, one person was a pumpkin spice latte, somebody else looked like the Headless Horseman, somebody else looked like a talking pumpkin. It is just really damn fun, and it's just, but all you need to be able to do is you can just, and what we use is the Snap Camera app. And here again, I'll put a link to not only the Snap Camera app, but a quick tutorial. All you have to do is it's something you can download for Mac or for Windows that lets you use Snapchat filters, but do it through your webcam. So go in, install it. You can pick all the different filters, all the same stuff you do on Snapchat. When you go into Zoom, you just go from the Zoom camera to the Snap camera, and then all of a sudden, bang, there it is for everything, for all of the meetings that you're in. And it's simple, but it's just really funny in the same way that funny shirt or funny tie day used to be. But you can change them up during the meeting. It just creates, like I said, it utilizes the technology. It utilizes remote. It lets you do things and have fun with it in ways that you couldn't in person. And I do think that developing those sort of things is really fun, and it's a really good idea. So, like I said, not only is it just a ton of fun, but I just was so happy, so proud. So like all of those things whenever you see the team doing that, because it's just, there's nothing better than to be surprised in that way. And just, again, to see people investing in the culture and the team in that way. Now, the next one I think goes back to being a little bit more practical. And I think this sort of links to the guide to working with me. And that this is similar to that, but a little bit different. And this is to take either a personality or a strength finder test and to discuss the results. These are things that are both asynchronous and real time. I think they're practical, and there's something I think you would only do once or maybe once a year. You don't need to do this like every month or something like that. On average, this is going to take about 60 minutes to take the test and about 60 minutes to discuss it. And you can use the personality test or leadership or strength finder test of your choosing. I'll talk about two of my favorites. But look, one of the core problems is that we're all trying to overcome is that it's hard to make real connections with people through a screen. And that's what all of these are really trying to deal with. And so where the guide to working with me is a good place to start, but the one weakness in that exercise, if we're being honest, is that the quality of that really is dependent on how well the person making that guide really knows themselves or how vulnerable they're willing to be. There's a way to do it where it's extremely useful and extremely vulnerable and really connects you with people. And then there's another way where you're just sort of going through the motions and you'd feel like, well, they're not really investing in this. And as a result, I'm not really learning anything. But I think a great next step after you do that guide is for you and your peers to do one of these personality tests or strength finder exercises. And because I think that, what this does is this gives you some really great insights, I think not only into yourself that maybe you don't know about, but it'll also give you a much deeper understanding of your peers and your other teams. Now, the two that I've used the most and that I like the most are 16 Personalities and the Gallup Strength Finder. Again, I'll put links to both of these in the show notes. You can go in and be able to get both of them. Now, I have never honestly been a huge fan of doing those personality tests because I always felt like they were like clickbait or phishing bait or something where people were just trying to learn a lot about you. 16 Personalities changed my mind about this. And I know I've talked about it at some point in the history of the show, but it's a personality test that I think goes much deeper and is much more useful than what I was expecting. And you can just go to 16personalities.com, and there's a free version. And you can go through and take it and sort of see what's going on and sort of what does it think. It will assign you kind of a personality class and then a subclass to be able to do that. And I think that's really good. But this is one of those cases where, like, almost all the time with these, there's like an upsell. And this is the case, and I forget how much it was. It wasn't much. It was like $20 or $30, and then you could get this like 200-page book that broke everything down. And it was just sort of like, look, this probably is going to be just a complete waste of my time. But I'm like, look, it's only 20 or 30 bucks. I'll try it. That is a document I think I referred to for years on myself. And that whenever I find myself in moments of inspiration or find myself in moments of frustration, I go back to it and use it because, man, there's a lot of good information in there, and it has been really useful. And so, again, I think that ability to be able to go through, to take the test, to see what you are, to learn more about yourself, and then to sit down as a team and to go through which of the 16 personalities you are, I think often will really let you understand much more about the people you work with, their communication style, their leadership style, just how they show up to work, what they value, a lot of those sort of things. So I think along those same lines, but probably a little bit more traditional to this, would be the Gallup Strength Finder. And this is a little bit more of the traditional leadership and team analysis, but here again, you go through in probably about 20 to 30 minutes taking a series of questions. Then it gives you a series of results around, I forget what it is. It's like over 30 different dimensions that are ranked from like your strongest to your weakest. It gives you a bunch of areas where those are in, a bunch of colors. There's a lot of things you can do with that. But again, it's really good then to have everybody take it, to sit down, to go through what that is, because I think you can start to see the comparisons, the contrasts of not only yourself, but for everybody else. So like I said, I'll put that in the show notes so that you can go in and take a look at that. Now, the last one really is, again, I think a lot of these, some of them are fun, some of them are introspective, but I think it also is good to be able to have one in here that if you're going to do team building, if you're going to do trust, you need to have at least one that makes sure it creates a space on a regular basis to really have the ability to have a conversation, to be able to look at how is the team doing. I think that sometimes what we'll do is we'll do retros, but retros really often will more focus on the work than the state of the team. How are people thinking, feeling? How do we work on our culture? How do we work on the team building? And here again, we just get a little bit too much caught up into the work. Now, the last one, this one once again comes from Atlassian and is one that I really love, and it's called the Health Monitor. And this is something that can be done in real time. It's practical and it is recurring. I think that probably monthly is about the right recurring length of time for this. It's about 60 minutes a month, and in this case, all you need is your favorite video conferencing app and some sort of a virtual whiteboard. But like I said, so this again comes from Atlassian, and this will again take us back to the Atlassian team playbook. And what this is really is it's a variation on the classic Agile retrospective, and what it does is it prompts the team to look at how are they working together instead of what they're working on. And here again, like I said, too many times we just focus on the work because it's easier, you can legislate process and stuff, but let's really focus on us. And what happened was that as Atlassian did a lot of research, they really found that there were 8 different attributes that they would see that healthy, high-performing teams had in common. And so on the back of those 8 attributes, they developed this health monitor, which is really a framework for assessing how your team is doing in each of those areas. And what it does is it looks at things like, do you have the right balance of skills on your team? Are you making decisions effectively? Do you understand the dependencies around your work? So it's a little bit of process, it's a little bit of team health. But again, I think that the thing that I love, and again, I'll put the link in this, is that whenever you go in and you run the play, you'll see they've actually done different versions of it. So there's one version of this where you can go through and be able to do a health monitor for leadership, one for a project, and one for a service team. But what happens is with your team, you want to get everybody together, and whenever you launch it, what you're going to do is you're going to read the definition of each attribute of this healthy, high-performing team out loud. And then what happens is on the count of 3, each person rates how they feel the team is doing compared to the definition. So what that means is, and again, there are different ways of doing it. You can do it with reactions in Zoom. You can literally do it by like a thumbs up, thumbs down, something like that. But what we'll say is, so like you count to 3, and what would happen would be if you put a thumbs up, that means you think it's green, that we're really close to, or that we're really on top of what that definition is. If you go through and you do a thumb sideways, that's yellow, which means, yeah, we're sort of getting there, but we aren't all the way there. And then a thumbs down is red, which means, no, we're not close to that at all. We really need to do work there. And what happens is whenever you do that, you have somebody who is on the whiteboard who goes through and records the results of each of these attributes that everyone rates into this health monitor grid. And so what happens is then you go through and you see how are we doing. And just through the simple green, yellow, red, usually the areas you need to work on jump out pretty easily. But then at the end, what you want to do is to choose one or two of those attributes that were in the yellow or red and get to work on how do you improve them. That do we need to do something like to be able to say, okay, look, that's a process that we need to refine. It's our roles and responsibilities. Or maybe we should do some scenario work to say, okay, in this scenario, how should it work, and map that out. And again, that ability to be able to recognize that. And I think that that's how you really create change, is that you create these spaces where people feel heard, where there is real action and transparency that comes out of it. Again, like this is something that everybody on my teams are required to do, is a monthly retro or health monitor, because we want to be able to create that space where everybody can come together and talk about it and say, look, how are things doing? Now, also, to be honest, this is something that only started in the last few months, because I think even for me in getting back into doing this and running teams at this way and this scale, even for me working remote for 4.5 years, there's definitely some of the stuff that I got wrong. Coming into a new role, I was too focused on the work. There were a lot of these things that I had to remember, or like I said, in the cases of some of these, be so happy and proud and love my team even more than I already do, to be reminded whenever they did things that, hey, this was important. But I think that's just what it is for here, right? Is that even if you don't like any of these exercises, look, there's a lot more out there. You can easily find them through research. Again, I'll post a couple of just some huge lists that I know about, and I'll put those in the show notes. But look, the bigger point here is that there has to be a focus on trust, on team building, and on creating these spaces, places, and ways of working that empowers vulnerability. Because we have to be more deliberate about this, right? Because we've talked before about, look, remote work can be isolating. It can be easy to be able to show up, to work with your team, to put on a performance. And, whenever you turn the video off, to never feel more isolated, more disconnected, more frustrated. But it's so much harder to see because we can't see the way we interact with people. But this is the thing. Start with one or two of these, or start with one or two that you like, but create the space for it. Invest in it. Like, again, use these tools in other ways that aren't just for working through deadlines and presenting decks and creating work, that is about creating culture, is about creating teamwork, is about doing these sort of things. Because I think when you're able to do that way we can honestly just remember a lot of the things that we did when we were in person, a lot of the things that we did well, but where the distance is winning, the screen is winning. And so the ability to do some of those sort of things to be able to bring this back is so incredibly important to building those strong teams, to building those strong relationships, especially because, look, that's why I said, we're in this place where the combination of this great resignation of a lot of people leaving the team, of new people coming in, they're not going to know each other the way your team did in the past whenever a lot of people were coming out of being in a physical office together. So that's the thing that you're going to see, is that more than ever, now is the time to think about this and invest in it, because if you don't, you're going to see what once high-performing teams start to really struggle because the trust and the team building wasn't there, or teams that were struggling are going to struggle even more because the few bonds that held them together just aren't going to be there. But also, too, if you go through, and there's some that you love, some that you've done on your team that are really fantastic. Look, I'm going to post this. It'll be on LinkedIn. It'll be on Twitter. You can reach out to me through the site, through the show, through anything else like that. Let me know some of the ones that you're doing that you really love, because I'd love to share them back out to the community so that there can be more of these of like, hey, these are the ones that I know people are doing that are working really well, and so that we can develop a bit more of a playbook around this, because I think it would be a really good resource for everybody to have. So, like I said, throughout the show, all the things I talked about, all the links, all that stuff will be in the show notes on thecrazy1.com. Just go to thecrazy1.com, go to episodes, go to all, or depending on when you listen to this, again, it would be the most recent show. And wherever you go in the show notes, you'll see all the stuff that's in there. As a thank you, remember, write a review on your favorite podcast platform to let people know what you think about the show. It's the only payment I ever ask for. It's the only time I ever ask for money or things like that. So do me the favor, take 2 minutes to do that. And look, as always, if you have those questions, want to be able to send me those ideas, those things like that, you can do it to me either through Twitter or Instagram. But those are just really crap messaging platforms, so I'd probably look at maybe doing it more through LinkedIn. But like I said, let me know about those sort of things. As always, everybody in legal wants me to remind you that these are just my own opinions. They don't represent any of my current or former employers. And finally, I say it every time because I mean it every time, but thank you for your time. I know that time is truly the only real luxury any of us have. I'm always incredibly humbled you want to spend any of it listening to me. So, with that being said, go out, have some fun, use these tools in different ways, build some teams, build some trust, make remote work feel a little more like work and not just remote work. And as always, while you're doing it, stay crazy.